What's good, ladies and gents? Welcome to the MKO Pugilism Boxing channel where we talk all things box. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, put it on all so you can get notified as soon as we drop new content on the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. So recently, at the same convention where Dillian Whyte was denied his WBC title shot, Saul Canelo Alvarez, the darling of the WBC, the crown jewel of the WBC is what I call him. But yeah, he the pound for pound king himself. So he was actually, the WBC announced that they would approve a Cruiserweight, WBC Cruiserweight title fight between Ilunga Makabu and Saul Canelo Alvarez. So again, this is something that Canelo spoke about, and him and Reynoso, they expressed interest that, look, we would be happy to take on Ilunga Makabu at Cruiserweight. So it seems that Canelo's not satisfied with cleaning up at super middleweight, winning world titles at middleweight and light heavyweight. He wants to now do another feat. He wants to do another fight at another even bigger, even heavier weight division. So yeah, it's a big thing here, really. As far as Makabu's concerned, he has lost a few fights. He's just lost 2 fights to be exact. The most notable fight and the most recent one he lost was a long time ago now. It's going back about 5 years, where he lost to Tony Bellew at Everton's ground, Ellen Road. He lost by 3rd round KO, I believe it was. But since then, to his credit, he's put together 9 straight wins over those 5 years since his loss. But again, the opposition he's faced at Cruiserweight hasn't been the best, hasn't been the notable names of the division. You know, it hasn't been the Bradyses and guys like that, or the U6. You know, he hasn't really, in his 9 fights, his last 9 fights, he hasn't really boxed anybody of any real note. And may I add that this last fight of his was close to a year ago. His last fight was, well, maybe it's 2 actually. No, it was, I think it was December of 2020, I believe, that he fought last. So it's nearly a year, something like that. It's around a year or something. It was definitely December 2020 it was. So it's about a year since he last fought. So he may have that bit of ring rust. Canelo, the question for him is, you know, this task, can he do it? Can he do the impossible? Well, I for one believe he can. As Makabu, he's a good fighter, but not an exceptional fighter. He's quite a sort of basic fighter. And I think as far as boxing skill goes, as far as ring IQ goes and ring generalship and everything, I think Canelo does everything better than Makabu. I think Canelo is like levels above Makabu when it comes to skills. The only real advantage Makabu can have is going to be the size and possibly strength and possibly punching power. I think punching power wise, he does pack a wallop. He hurt Bellew, and he's hurt the big boys at Cruiserweight. So he does pack a wallop. He does pack a punch, does Makabu. So he'll have the power, he'll have the strength, and he'll have the size, and just being used to fighting at that weight of 200 pounds. He'll have that going in his favor. But at the same time, I think that if this fight does happen, it's just one of these fights where it's the perfect opponent for Canelo. It's that perfect calculation, you know, the same way it was for Roy Jones Jr. when he took on John Ruiz. You know, at the time, John Ruiz was the weaker champion. He was nowhere near the level of Lennox Lewis or anyone of that nature, or Tyson in his prime. John Ruiz was, you know, not the biggest heavyweight, a bit of a plodder, you know, not really the most dangerous heavyweight there is out there. But what he did have when he fought Roy Jones Jr. was a belt. He had a belt. He had a title. He had, and that title was all Roy Jones needed. So he carefully made the match and carefully picked John Ruiz. He didn't pick the best heavyweight. He picked the smaller heavyweight and kind of the weaker of the division. And I think when it comes to Canelo and Makabu, this is what it is. It's like that perfect calculation, that perfect bit of matchmaking where, okay, he's not going to go after, although he's new to the division, he's not going to go after a collie who, okay, he's not nowhere near Canelo's level, but the size and the strength and the height, and it's a hard night's work. And the power, it's a hard night's work. He's younger, he's fresher, etc. He's dangerous. He's a collie. He's not going to go after a Bradis at the weight. One of the top guys. But you've got Makabu here, who is the smaller of the cruiserweights. He's a small cruiserweight. He routinely and often weighs in below the 200 pounds limit. He's a guy who, he comes in the 190s, like 193, 194. He's a guy that makes the cruiserweight limit. He comes in below it nearly all the time that he fights. So he hardly even gets to 200 pounds. So he's definitely a smaller cruiserweight, and he's definitely the weakest of all the cruiserweight champions, I would say, and I would include Lawrence Okolie in that bunch, So this is one of those fights where, yes, it's a great feat for him to be able to do it. It's a great thing to do, but at the same time, by him doing this, it's not the same as taking on the best cruiserweight. It's not the same as taking on a Bradis, who's basically the man at cruiserweight. It's not the same as taking on the very best. This is calculated risk, taking on the smallest cruiserweight and the one that I would back Canelo to beat. Because as much as Makabu, yes, he's got the size, he's got the strength, I just think Canelo would just be too skillful. And I think he'd have the skill, and he's got a bit of pop. He'd probably carry a bit of punching power up there. And I think Canelo may even be able to stop Ilunga Makabu. I think he's just the right, because he's just not that big, and because of how good Canelo is. And I reckon Canelo probably walks around, 180, 190. He probably gets him. He probably, he's always coming heavy, even when he was a welterweight. So I reckon Canelo probably walks around 180 something himself. So I reckon it's one of them where the weight difference might not even be that big. But yeah, I'd say it would be an interesting one, but I'd say Canelo's calculated risk on his part, and I'd back him to deal with Makabu, and possibly deal with him. I'd say probably deal with Makabu inside the distance. I reckon he could probably get him out of there with his accurate, sharp punching, and he would carry an advantage in speed as well. Just him being lighter, coming up from sort of super middle, he'd be able to sting Makabu with shots, and he'd just be too quick, too sharp, and too accurate for a guy like Makabu. So yeah, it's interesting. It's not 100% down, set in stone, but it's a possibility, and I think it's a good possibility, good feat for Canelo to do. Another sort of feather in his bow. Many people will ask, does this mean that by him going to cruiserweight, does this mean that he's ducking Bivol, he's ducking Beterbiev, he's ducking Benavidez or Charlo? And I'd say, no, it doesn't mean he's necessarily ducking those guys, to be honest, because he's done what he's supposed to do in boxing, really. He's cleared out his division, super middleweight. He's become undisputed. He's beat basically the best at middleweight. A guy that Charlo and these other guys ain't fought in Gennady Golovkin. Yeah, so Canelo is one of them guys now, having beaten Golovkin, cleared out super middleweight, and beaten one of the dangerous light heavyweight champions, although he was on a slide in Sergey Kovalev. He's done enough in his boxing career now where he's become the cash cow. He's become the guy that you need to fight if you want to make money. So he's in a stage of his career where he's achieved a lot. His resume is just littered with good names, including the great Floyd Mayweather Jr., Mayweather, Kovalev, GGG twice, I mean, there's hardly anybody that he hasn't fought. So he's gone through weight divisions. He's fought some of the best available opposition. Resume is between those weights, super middle and middle and that. His resume is probably the best. It is the best really. So he's got nothing really to prove, and by fighting these guys, a Benavidez, a Charlo, Andrade, yes, he can gain a little bit from fighting and beating those guys, but because he'd be such an overwhelming favorite, he could just look at it and say, why should I bother with this? I don't need you guys. I'm not bothered. I don't need to fight you guys. Because by him beating them, well, it's something, but I mean, it's not really that great for probably for his resume. I mean, beat Danny Jacobs. I mean, he's just beating so many good fighters that beating these guys now, it doesn't really do that much really to boost him. At least in my opinion, I think the only boost he could probably get where you can say, right, well, this is a bit of a feat, is probably at light heavy. I think against the Bivals and Beterbievs, I think that's where he could where you could say, right, wow, this is a bit of a step up, because those guys are very good and they're very dangerous and stuff. And again, even at cruiserweight, if if he was to take on a Bradis or even an Akoli, one of those sort of bigger, stronger guys, okay, we can say, right, wow, this really is greatness. But what he's done so far has been great, so doesn't really have anything to prove. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about him at cruiserweight. And yeah, until next time, it's MKO Pugilism. We over and out. Catch you on the next one.